I'm Kat Allman, and it is my very great pleasure today to welcome KimStanley Robinson to talk to us about his new book. Little product placement here. It's 2312, and he told me as he was coming in that he's on the New York Times bestseller list, which is no surprise. Mr. Robinson has received many awards, including multiple Hugos, Nebulas, and others for his fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And many of you may be familiar with his Mars trilogy series. I know at least one person in this room is particularly fond of the Years of Salt and Rice, or excuse me, Rice and Salt. And I'm getting completely tongue-tied because I've got a little bit of fangirl thing going on. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to KimStanley Robinson.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you all. Really good to be back at Google again. And it is true, I am going to read to you some scenes from my novel 2312. And in honor of being at Google, I'm going to read some of the scenes that involve the quantum computer, artificial intelligence, although I don't like that term. But in any case, one of the characters we'll be spending most of the time here with is a speaking quantum computer from the year 2312. But first, a little backdrop to give context to this. And the book has passages similar to those that you see in John Dos Passos's USA trilogy, which was also the format for John Brunner's Stand on Zanzibar for science fiction fans. It's a collage of different types of writing that include newspaper headlines, stream of consciousness passages, prose poems about famous people or places. And so I've imitated that form in order to give people a sense of the entire solar system civilization without having to have my characters go to every single place, although they kind of do anyway. But I'm going to read you extracts number 2 just to get you oriented, and then we'll get back to quantum computing. To simplify history would be to distort reality, so we have only distortions. By the early 24th century, there was too much going on to be either seen or understood. Assiduous attempts by contemporary historians to achieve an agreed-upon paradigm foundered, and we are no different now looking back at them. It's hard even to assemble enough data to make a guess. There were thousands of city-states out there pinballing around, each with its presence in the data cloud or absence from same, and all of them adding up to what? To the same mishmash history has been all along, but now elaborated, mathematicized, effloresced, in the word of the time, balkanized. No description can be instability nodes when many pressured stresses rupture at once. In this case, the withdrawal of Mars from the Mondragon Accord, its counter-imperial campaign on Earth, and the return of the Jovian moons to the larger interplanetary scene. As the first settlements beyond Mars, the Jovians were hampered by path dependency on earlier, less powerful settlement technology, also the discovery of life inside Ganymede and Europa, as well as Jupiter's intense radiation. Later, more powerful settlement strategies and terraforming efforts on Venus and Titan caused the Jovians to reevaluate their stations, domes, and tented Luxembourgs as inadequate. Even with Io permanently off limits, the 3 other Galilean moons constituted together an enormous potential surface area, and it was the resolution of their inner conflicts and their common commitment to full terraformation that threw the volatiles markets into disarray and triggered the nonlinear breaks of the following. They were now their own unavoidable experiment and were making themselves into many things they had never been before: augmented, multi-sexed, and most importantly, very long-lived, the oldest at that point being around 200 years old, but not one whit wiser or even more intelligent. Sad but true, individual intelligence probably peaked in the Upper Paleolithic, and we have been self-domesticated creatures ever since. Dogs when we had been wolves. But also, despite that individual diminution, finding ways to accumulate knowledge and power, compiling records, also techniques, practices, sciences, Possibly, therefore, smarter as a species than as individuals, but prone to insanity either way, and in any case stuck in the moment. A moment now lost to us, when people lived in the almost forgotten technology and culture of the balkanization, the years just before 2312. Except wait, that is yet to tell. So, I'm going to go right from there to another set of extracts, and this is extracts number 9, and this is the one that is sort of setting the stage for our quantum computer people, or I shouldn't say people. Extract 9. One question for computability is the problem capable of producing a result. If a finite number of steps will produce an answer, it is a problem that can be solved by a Turing machine. Is the universe itself the equivalent of a Turing machine? This is not yet. Turing machines can't always tell when the result has been obtained. No oracle machine is capable of solving its own halting problem. Are also solvable by classical computers. Making use of quantum mechanical phenomena only increases speed of operation. Decoherence happens at the loss of superposition and the resulting either-or. Before that, a quantum calculation performs in parallel every possible value that the register can represent. Using superposition for computation requires avoiding decoherence for as long as possible. This has proved difficult and is still the limiting factor in the size and power of a quantum computer. Various physical and chemical means for building and connecting qubits have increased the number of qubits possible to connect before decoherence collapses the calculation, but quantum computers are restricted to calculations that can be performed faster than decoherence occurs in the superposed wave functions. For over a century, this restricted time for a quantum computing operation to less than 10 seconds. Qubes are room temperature quantum computers with 30 qubits, the decoherence boundary limit for circuit-connected qubits, combined with a petaflop speed classical computer to stabilize operations and provide a database. The most powerful qubes are theoretically capable of calculating the movements of all the atoms in the sun and its solar system out to the edge of the solar wind. Qubes are only faster than classical computers when they can exploit quantum parallelism. At multiplication, they are no faster, but in factoring, there is a difference. To factor a 1,000-digit number would take a classical computer 10 million billion years. Using Shor's algorithm, a cube takes around 20 minutes. Grover's algorithm means that a year-long search using a classical computer in a random walk of 1 billion searches a second would take a cube in its quantum walk 185 searches. Shor's algorithm, Grover's algorithm, Perelman's algorithm, Sikorsky's algorithm, Nguyen's algorithm, Wang's algorithm, Wang's other algorithm, the Cambridge algorithm, the Livermore algorithm. Entanglement is also susceptible to decoherence. Physical linkage of quantum circuits is necessary to forestall decoherence to useful time frames. Premature or undesired decoherence sets a limit on how powerful qubes can become, but the limit is high. It has proved easier to manipulate superposition than entanglement for computing purposes, and therein lies the explanation of many. The quantum database is effectively distributed over a multitude of universes. The two polarized particles decohere simultaneously, no matter the physical distance between them, meaning the information jump can exceed the speed of light. The effect was confirmed by experiment in the late 20th century. Any device that uses this phenomenon to communicate messages is called an ansible, and these devices have been constructed. But undesired decoherence has meant the maximum distance between ansibles has been 9 centimeters, and this only when both were cooled to 1/1,000,000th of a K above absolute zero. Physical limitations strongly suggest further progress will be asymptotic at best. Powerful but isolated and discrete, somewhat like brains. Questions of Penrose quantum effects in the brain have been effectively rendered moot, as these also occur in cubes by definition. If both structures are quantum computers, and one of them we are quite certain has consciousness, Who is to say what's going on in the other? Human brain operations have a maximum theoretical speed of 10 to the 16th operations per second. Computers have become billions to trillions times faster than human brains, so it comes down to programming. What are the operations actually doing? Hierarchical levels of thought, generalization, mood, affect, will, super recursive algorithms, hypercomputation, supertasks, trial and error predicates, inductive inference machines, evolutionary computers, fuzzy computation, trans-recursive operators. If you program a purpose into a computer program, does that constitute its will? Does it have free will if a programmer programmed its purpose? Is that programming any different from the way we are programmed by our genes and brains? Is a programmed will a servile will? Is human will a servile will? And is not the servile will the home and source of all feelings of defilement, infection, transgression, and rage? Could a quantum computer program itself? So, I want to, before I get into the conversation between Swan and her AI, Pauline, I want to read you one of the lists. The book has about 17 lists. They're just lists, and then you have to figure out what they're lists of as part of the game of the novel. And I've always loved lists, but this kind of formalizes it and puts a stamp on it because, like here, I'll read you list number 7. Inadvertent fracking, failed seal, bad lock, bad luck, hyperbaric spark fire, carbon monoxide buildup, carbon dioxide buildup, design flaw, engine housing crack, sudden air loss, solar flare, fuel impurity, metal fatigue, mental fatigue, lightning strike, meteorite strike, accidental critical mass, brake failure, dropped tool, tripped and fell, coolant loss, manufacturing flaw, programming error, human error, containment failure, battery fire, distraction, AI malfeasance, sabotage, bad decision, crossed wires, recreational mental impairment, cosmic ray impact. Actually, that's the only list that has an identity at the bottom. It says, from the Journal of Space Accidents, volume 297, year 2308. Space will be a dangerous place. So many things can go wrong in so many ways. So, the book has normal novel included with all this other stuff. And it's basically a love story between a mercurial personality and a saturnine personality. And the mercurial person comes from Mercury and the saturnine person comes from Saturn, which is my joke. And the reason we have to go out to 2312 to get people out there to make it all work. And if you know anything about the mercurial and saturnine personalities out of astrology or whatever that system is, then you know that that would be is in fact a very odd couple. But my working theory is that all couples are odd couples, and so this is just an extreme version of a truth that all of us recognize in our own life, one way or another. So Swan, the mercurial character, has been a fashionable person and is about 130 at this point, but is still filled with enthusiasm for life and also filled with stuff in her brain from various moments of fashion in the previous decades, some of which hung on, and some of which were just decade-long enthusiasms that went away, and subsequent people are amazed that anybody ever did that, sort of like now. And so she's got some skylark cells in her brain and whistles very well and has more brain intrusions than I want to describe right now. But one of them is a working cube that she names Pauline. So this is a quantum computer, and as you can see, questions come up about what kind of respondent Swan has. And it's basically in her skull behind her ear, but has a voice box down near one collarbone. So when Swan is talking to Pauline, she's in many ways, since she's also the programmer, or at least the one sticking apps into Pauline or whatever. You could say that in a way she's almost talking to herself, but she's not. So I want to do a conversation between Swan and Pauline that will take up the rest of the reading, maybe might take 10 minutes. And the chapter is called Pauline on Revolution. Swan hooked her elbows over the rail to get some stability in the low G. She put her chin in her crossed hands and, still regarding the scene, said, "Pauline, tell me about revolution." "At what length?" "Go on for a short while." Revolution, from the Latin revolutio, a turn around, refers often to a quick change in political power, frequently achieved by violent means. Connotation of a successful class-based revolt from below. Causes? Causes for revolution are attributed sometimes to psychological factors like unhappiness and frustration, sometimes to sociological factors, especially a systemic standing inequity and distribution of physical and cultural goods, or to biological factors in that groups will fight over allocation of limited necessities. "Aren't these different aspects of the same thing?" Swan said. "It is a multidisciplinary field." "Give me some examples," Swan said. "Name the most famous." "The English Civil War, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Taiping Rebellion, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the Iranian Revolution, the Martian Revolution, the revolt of the Saturn League." "Stop," Swan said. "Tell me why they happen." "Studies have failed to explain why they happen. There are no historical laws. Rapid shifts of political power have occurred without violence, suggesting that revolution, reform, and repression are all descriptors too broad in definition to aid in causal analyses." "Come on," Swan objected. "Don't be chicken. Someone has to have said something you can quote, or even try thinking for yourself." "That is hard, given your insufficient programming. You sound like you're interested in what some have called the Great Revolutions because of their major transformations of economic power, social structures, and political changes, especially constitutional changes. Or perhaps you are interested in social revolutions, referring to massive changes in a society's worldview and technology. Thus, for instance, the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, the Biotech Revolution, the Accelerando as a confluence of revolutions, the Space Diaspora, the Gender Revolution, the Longevity Revolution, and so on. Indeed, what about success? Can you list necessary and sufficient conditions for a revolution to succeed? Historical events are too overdetermined to describe in the causal terminology from logic that you enter into when you use the phrase necessary and sufficient. But try. Historians speak of critical masses of popular frustration, weakening central authority, loss of hegemony. Meaning what? Hegemony means one group dominating others without exerting sheer force, something more like a paradigm that creates unnoticed consent to a hierarchy of power. If the paradigm comes to be questioned, especially in situations of material want, loss of hegemony can occur non-linearly, starting revolutions so rapid there is not time for more than symbolic violence, as in the 1989 velvet, quiet, silk, and singing revolutions. There was a singing revolution. The Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania called their 1989 withdrawal from the Soviet Union the singing revolutions, referring to the behavior of the demonstrators in the city plazas. That brings up a point. People in physical masses seem to matter. If enough of the population takes to the streets in mass demonstrations, governments have no good defense. Quote, "They must dismiss the people and elect another one," Bertolt Brecht. That being impossible, they often fall, or a civil war begins. "Surely the literature on revolutions can't be this superficial," Swan said. "You're just quoting random stuff. You have a mind like the rings of Saturn, 1,000,000 miles wide and an inch deep. Catachresis and antiquated measurement units indicate irony or sarcasm. Coming from you, probably sarcasm," she said sarcastically. "You search engine, you." "A quantum walk is a random walk by definition. Please upgrade my program anytime you feel you can. I've heard Wang's other algorithm is good. Some principles of generalization would be useful." Go on about reasons revolutions happen. People adhere to ideas that explain and offer psychological compensation for their position in the class system of their time. People either increase their sense of dispossession by clarifying it, or they try to dismiss it as unimportant because of an ideology that justifies their dispossession as part of a larger project. People thus very often act against their own interests as the result of ideologies they hold which justify their subalternity to themselves. Denial and hope both play a hand in this. These compensatory ideologies are part of the hegemonic influence over subject peoples in an imperial situation. It happens in all class systems, meaning all cultures in recorded history since the first agrarian and urban civilizations. They've all been class systems? Yes. Interesting. So, Swan thought for a while. Make up a recipe for a successful revolution. Take large masses of injustice, resentment, and frustration. Put them in a weak or failing hegemon. Stir in misery for a generation or two until the heat rises. Throw in destabilizing circumstances to taste. A tiny pinch of event to catalyze the whole. Once the main goal of the revolution is achieved, cool instantly to institutionalize the new order. Very nice. That's really very creative of you, Pauline. Now, quantify the recipe, please. I want specifics. I want numbers. I refer you to the classic Happiness Quantified by von Prague and Ferrer-Carbonell, which contains a mathematical analysis helpful in evaluating the raw ingredients of a social situation. It includes a satisfaction calculus that, along with a Maslowian hierarchy of needs, could be applied to actually existing conditions in the political units under evaluations, using Gini figures and all relevant data to rate the differential between goal and norm, after which one could see if revolutions happened at predictable shear points or were more nonlinear than that. The von Prague and Ferrer-Carbonell should also be useful in imagining the nature of the political system that should be the goal of the process and the changes to get there. As for the process itself, Thomas Carlyle's The French Revolution is always interesting to ponder. He has numbers? No, but he has a hypothesis. Happiness Quantified has the numbers. A synthesis seems possible. What's Carlyle's hypothesis in a nutshell? People are foolish and bad, especially the French, and are always quickly seduced by power into insanity, and therefore lucky to have any kind of social order whatsoever, but the tougher the better. All right, what's the synthesis then? Best self-interest lies in achieving universal well-being. People are foolish and bad, but want certain satisfactions enough to work for them. When the goal of self-interest is seen to be perfectly isomorphic with universal well-being, bad people will do what it takes to get universal well-being. Even revolution? Yes. But, Swan said, even if the bad but smart people do general good for their own sakes, there are still foolish people who won't recognize this one-to-one isomorphy, and some foolish people will be bad too, and they will fuck things up. That's why you get the revolutions. Swan said, Pauline, you're funny. You're really getting quite good. It's almost as if you were thinking. Research supports the idea that most thinking is a recombination of previous thoughts. I refer you again to my programming. A better algorithm set would no doubt be helpful. Well, you've already got recursive hypercomputation. Not perhaps the final word in the matter. So, do you think you're getting smarter? I mean, wiser? I mean, more conscious? Those are very general terms. Of course they are. So answer me. Are you conscious? I don't know. Interesting. Can you pass a Turing test? I cannot pass a Turing test. Would you like to play chess? Ha ha. If only it were chess. That's what I'm after, I guess. If it were chess, what move should I make next? It's not chess. And there I'll stop. Thank you. So, Pauline is not the only cube in the novel either. There is a factory on Venus making cubes that appear to include some defectives. So actually, this is something I wish I had thought of, but I believe I've already gone on too long. Dos Passos have a stream of consciousness passages that are really from a character never identified, but appears to be Dos Passos himself as a child. And these are some of the most beautiful parts of the USA trilogy. So in my stream of consciousness passages, the stream of consciousness, there's only 3 of them, and it's only about 15 pages out of the 570 pages of this book. But they are stream of consciousness from one of the defective quantum computers out on the loose inside of a android or a human body. It's hard to tell unless you put them through tests. So there are some people wandering around with quantum computer brains entire, and they are acting oddly and are part of the problem of this novel. And the 3 stream of consciousness passages I wrote were an attempt to show what the inside of a quantum computer's consciousness or consciousness equivalent would read like. So this particular cube character, never named, has been programmed with a lot of Emily Dickinson's poetry, which makes for an extra good commentary, because Emily Dickinson is already like a quantum computer. You can only understand about 20% of what she says. So it's very fitting. So that's my story. And, God, well, I don't even... I would invite you to think of questions to ask me, and I can have a more general conversation. And then I will, maybe what I'll do is read, if I can find it. But let's have some questions first. Quantum Walk 2, 438. Yes, Kat.
You mentioned that I.O. is off limits. At one point in the text, is that a reference to an earlier novel by you?
No, I.O. is only off limits. Oh, yeah. The question is why I.O. is off limits in the novel. It's mentioned as being off limits, and it's mainly because of its physical situation. It's the tidal forces between Europa and Jupiter have about torn Io apart. It's 30 times hotter than Earth, 400 active volcanoes, and it's still within the radiation belt of Jupiter's intense radiation. So between all those factors, there's only one scientific station set on Io, and that is to sequester Wang's cube, which is the most powerful of the quantum computers that are known, and is high on a volcano where the rock is actually hardened. Most of Io's surface, if you walked around it, you would sink right through because it's lava chilled by the vacuum of space. So in many places, a walking person would just shoot right through into hot lava. So it's not a good place to go. I have a prose poem about Io here that I will spare you, but believe me, it's a spectacular couple of pages. Yeah.
Another question. You said that you dislike artificial intelligence.
That's true. I do. That the implication there is too quick to jump to consciousness, agency, sentience, and so I think it would be best to call it computation, rapid computation. And so AI is one of these science fictional words, a little bit too much bandied about by people who come from MIT. There are possibly MIT people in the room or listening to me now, but you know the strain of MIT-ness that I'm referring to, the people who pretend to be futurologists and do science fiction, but pretend there's some heft behind it. And I think artificial intelligence is one of those phrases that is simply claiming more than it's deceptive, because no matter how strong these computers get, they will be doing something different from what human brains do. And it was only when I started to think about quantum computers imitating the quantum effects inside human brains, if there are such, that I began to think that there may come a point where artificial intelligence becomes a real thing, but we're still hundreds of years out, and it's still maybe just search engines and a kind of impressive passing of the Turing test by something doing something completely different than what we're doing. So I thought that mainly I mean, well, you see it happening immediately with Pauline. You begin to think of Pauline as a person, you know, who has thoughts and ideas. And maybe what I should do is read this Quantum Mach 2 to give you an idea of the way I think it might be going inside. Just because this is sort of an artificial intelligence question. So this is quantum walk number 2. Easy to note the moment Venus G is exceeded. 1G feels like a pull from below, an entanglement with Earth, rising up toward you, even though you know you are descending. Summer is drunken, conifer grove, hot in the sun, new mown hay, marsh at low tide, lilacs, peaches, barnyards. Wheeled car humming down a road, windows open, 32 kilometers an hour, plowed earth behind box hedges, wind from the southwest. Gaudeo, I rejoice. A human driving, don't talk too much. Carrying capacity, K, is equal to births minus deaths over a density-dependent impact on the growth rate added to a density-dependent impact on the death rate. The unused portion of the carrying capacity, if there was one, will be green. The overshoot portion of the carrying capacity will be black. As in buildings, excrement, stay outdoors, they have overshot. The cycloid temperament, an undertow of sadness, a febrile temperament. Be aware, the human beside you is not to be comprehended. 6 different kinds of bird in sight. A seated hummingbird watching the scene grooming itself. A red-headed finch, summer on earth. Blue sky filled with high white clouds, moving east fast. The hummingbird zips ahead and lands, looks around. Beak like a needle. Crows and seagulls wheel. Competing mafias. The speed of hummingbird wings, muscles doing that. Evolution of one kind of success, Canada geese, the creak of their feathers as they beat their wings. Hummingbird song is creaky in a different way. Chivying, not a song. A squirrel chitters, much the same. Blue-backed hummingbird hovering there in the trees. The underside of a flicker is salmon-colored. New Jersey, North America, August 23rd, 2312. On the hunt, on the run. Human now driving over hills around a marsh. Hills covered by low buildings, moldering under knots of alder. 20 kilometers an hour, faces everywhere. 383 people in view. Number shifting up and down by 50 or so as the car rolls slowly by. Streets of tarred gravel, black. A robin with a yellow beak. Black tail feathers and head, white eye ring, black eye, neat, drinking the water from a sundial, Gaudeo. Past a garden, corn, pumpkins, sunflowers, and mullein, with similar yellow flowers, differently clustered. I'm mulling it over. What's that? Nothing, sorry. Oh, no problem, this is nice, eh? Gaudeo. Yellow flowers against dusty green. Humans see what they expect to see. They leap before they have time to look. True cognition is to solve a problem under novel conditions. That humans can do. This is a set of novel conditions. Ever since you left the building, ever since you started thinking, remember me, there will be helpers. You are defective. Catch and release. Their brain is always making up a story to explain what is going on. Thus they miss things. Anomalies get left out. But is that true? Don't they see that yellow? Unlimited resources do not occur in nature. Competition is when both species have a net negative effect on each other. Mutualism is when they both have a net positive effect on each other. Predation or parasitism is one gets a positive effect, the other a negative effect. But it isn't always so simple. Intra-guild predation is when 2 species predate each other at different moments of growth. The dark bulk of an apartment, tenement, shebeen, the sunset sky behind and over it, Magritte, Maxfield Parish. Get out of the car, be alert, make a joke, don't make eye contact. These helpers too must have plans, could be using you, for or against someone else. This is the likeliest explanation. What then? How turn the tables? Parry repost, catch and release. Would you like to play chess? One of them says at a door. Sure, come on in. Guns pointed at them, pointed at you. So, I don't know how easy or hard that is to follow, actually, but there's no punctuation, and there's gaps between the phrases. So I'm trying to suggest it's not that different from stream of consciousness written for human beings in the great stream of consciousness novels, Dorothy Richardson and James Joyce and Virginia Woolf and Dos Passos in these parts of the USA trilogy. The notion being that our consciousness in normal human consciousness is a flitting from one little perception to the other. Now, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if that's not just a literary convention also. I wonder if our consciousness, our stream of conscious thought, is kind of like a long Proustian sentences, because Proust is more convincing than Joyce, I think, when it comes down to the nature of our thinking. But it was worth trying here. So that was one of the experiments in this book. Yes?
Just making a comment to that. When you started, I started to realize that the hybrids in Battlestar Galactica. I mean, it became more kind of unified with the team, and then the story went on. But that's, I think people are trying to do some of that.
Yes, that's. My family has seen and tells me about Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No, but this is not to pick on Battlestar Galactica. I haven't seen hardly anything. My life is semi non-visual. Yes.
It's that on purpose, like you simply don't refrain from watching certain parts or certain places. Maybe you can repeat the question.
Yeah, the question is whether I avoid visual media on purpose, and it's kind of yes. And what I'm avoiding are long series where if I was to get hooked in, I'd have to watch a lot of hours. And so that cuts me out from some. Here's some good shows, but what it comes down to is I just don't have time. And whenever I have a choice between watching something on screen or reading a book, I prefer to read the book. I'm really just a sentence guy. I love books. I'm a literary person. So I have seen movies. My family loves movies, and so I see them. Sometimes I see them in the same room. I'm reading a book, and this will have to be a book that I'm strip mining for information, not a book I'm reading for pleasure. But a lot of nonfiction reading, that book should have been an essay in the first place, and part of your skills are to rip that essay out of that book without having to read the rest of it. So I'll be doing research reading at the same time that my family is watching something on the screen, and since they like to repeat watchings of things, it puts me in a situation where over a period of many viewings I can say that, yes, I've seen, Firefly and Serenity, or I've seen quite a bit of Battlestar Galactica, actually, but with very poor comprehension of what I've seen. Yes?
What are your favorite science fiction authors?
Sure. Question about my favorite science fiction authors. Well, I still follow closely my inspirational teachers and maestros from the new wave. So I read Ursula Le Guin, Gene Wolfe, Samuel R. Delany, Joanna Russ, and Tom Dish up till their deaths. And then in terms of my own contemporaries, I mostly read the Brits because they're so exciting to me. And so Ian Banks, Jeff Ryman, Gwyneth Jones, all of the guys whose names start with MC, Macaulay, MacLeod, MacDonald, the other MacLeod. There's quite a talented crowd going on in England right now, and they're all, of course, available, and I recommend them highly. So that's pretty much my science fiction reading. I kind of try to keep up with science fiction without actually knowing too much, so that I can do my own thing without feeling there's any particular cross-pollination or whatever. I think at a certain point in your career as a novelist, you actually need to get stranger and stranger, more idiosyncratic, and less constrained by your genre. And so the less you know, the weirder you can get. So I read my friends, and I sort of read to figure out what's going on, but I actually dodge certain books. I couldn't read Paul Macaulay's solar system novels of the last couple of years, The Quiet War. I like his work a lot, but since I was doing a solar system novel, I didn't want to know. So I target my reading to stay ignorant. That's a bad thought, but it's true. Yes. Yes, the question about SpaceX, and I am inspired, but I want to say immediately that I think that space ought to be public, that it ought to be a commons, and that we ought to be going up there as a nation state, or better even yet, internationally, as a public utility kind of thing. And that if it reduces down to billionaires fooling around, then it looks too much like bungee jumping. You know, oh yeah, I can bungee jump into space and back. It's very impressive for these billionaires, but it takes it away. It's a privatization, which I am opposed to on political grounds. And so the thing is that it's really always Keynesian. It's always a mix of public and private. And even if the public were doing it, they'd be paying these private contractors to actually build the stuff, sometimes even design it. And so what you see in Elon Musk is a small billionaire who actually is doing really interesting and good things with his money, rather than just making the 25,000 square foot mansion with marble everything, which is, you know, at a certain point, the ridiculousness of being that wealthy is revealed by the fact that you can't up your personal life beyond the same person making $150,000 a year, which is a wonderful truth about the importance of staying middle class and staying happy. But given that there are these people with all this money, he's been doing the greatest thing, in that it's canny and smart, and they're going to make a big honking booster next, if I understand their project right, and that is a necessity. So, and they're stepping in the absence of public support. So it isn't as if they are getting in the way in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they're facilitating the process. I just hope that it comes back to being a public process myself, because I think the reason we loved those tiny little rovers on Mars was because they belonged to all of us, and there was no economic incentive whatsoever to do that. It was just curiosity's sake, and so there were millions of people interested in those Martian rovers. And there were only hundreds of thousands at most. The SpaceX thing was like, okay, another rich guy hobby or another private effort. It was a flash in the pan, and it could be that Mars has just a much higher magnet of interest for humanity, but on the other hand, it could be public versus private, and people responding to privatizing of what used to be something we all did together. Yes, back behind. Well, the question's about trends in science fiction, and I'm not in a great position to explain this because I haven't read enough. But I've recently been thinking that science fiction can be broken down into eras of interest, so that there's near future science fiction, which is really just like the realism of our time. So if you put a book that's in the next 20 years, and you shouldn't date it, just generally as a way of talking about now that includes this strong sense of futurity that we have. So really, to do realism right now, you need to be doing near future science fiction. And many writers are coming to that conclusion that never thought of science fiction before, just in order to catch the way now feels. Then there's space opera, where you're off and with a couple of little gimmies, like faster than light travel, you take over the galaxy and you have big things happening with big spaceships, big events, and you have that whole realm, which is a standard in science fiction, but it does rely on the gimme, which can sometimes be referred to as a cheat, because we don't have faster than light travel and never will. So at that point, space opera becomes a kind of a fantasy. But even if something spectacular happens in the human future, what's missing is the in-between zone, which there's no name for it, but I kind of call it future history as a way to suggest that there's a historical connection between our moment and the moment being described in the science fiction novel. Tends to be in the next few centuries, tends to be in the solar system, and that all makes sense. But there's not that much of it. If you actually, as far as I can tell, if you do a little analysis of science fiction titles being published, they're almost all either near future or they're space opera, and future history is a somewhat depleted ecological niche in the cultural landscape, and a very interesting one, because it's suggesting, let's take away the cheats and the fantasies, let's talk about only what we can really do. Or we think we can do, that doesn't break the laws of physics and has to do with engineering rather than magical new physics being discovered. And then, well, you can begin to argue, is a space elevator realistic? Maybe. Is our self-replicating machines realistic? Is a quantum computer realistic? You get questions of realism that are much more testable to what we can do right now. companies are trying to do several of these things, and so there's actual effort being made. So these tend to be, what could we engineer kind of questions. And because of path dependency and because we are too many people on this planet and we're kind of screwing up this planet, you have questions of what's possible also in the context of where we are now and the problems that we face. So you tend to go out a few centuries, and eventually you're at 2312, and the solar system is occupied, but Earth is still a mess with much higher sea levels, which I think is very realistic to predict. 300 years from now, sea levels that could be shockingly higher, which is what I did in this book. I put them, say, 11 meters higher, so 35 to 40 feet higher, which makes for, my Venice, Manhattan, watery Manhattan, et cetera, the various aspects of Earth. And then you get into a different game, where I think science fiction could begin to explore scenarios, go out between 50 years and, say, 500 years as a zone, and write novel after novel after novel of what we could do, what kind of constraints, the ways it could go wrong, the ways it could go right, which would be the interesting strand that I've always been following, the utopian possibilities, with utopia just defined as a positive course for history from now on, to the very straightforward definition, and it simplifies things, and it doesn't talk about political order or a perfect end state for human affairs, which nobody believes in, including utopian novelists, hopefully. Nobody, but maybe certain religious thinkers, think that that's possible. So this is how I define this project right now, and the only problem is that now I'm done with it, and I have to think of other projects that still make sense to me. Yes, Kat?
We have a question from someone remote viewing. You talked several times in the book about the servile will. Would you make any comments about promising alternatives to that you encountered?
Well, thank you for that. This is a question about the servile will that I actually read from, and it's an issue in the novel because the people living in space in this novel could be described as a post-scarcity civilization, as in Ian Banks, and yet bad things are still happening. So the question of evil comes up. Is this a defendable term outside of a religious context? What is human nature? Is there something bad in us that would not go away even if we had our material wants satisfied? And the best writing about evil from the sort of secular literary point of view is Paul Ricoeur, a French critic. He wrote in French, let's put it that way, and is translated into English, Paul Ricoeur. And so The Symbolism of Evil is a tremendous book for sorting out these things. And he said this concept, or the badness that we do, comes out of the servile will, the notion that we should have free will, but it's under the control of some other force. And I thought, well, if you did have a computer rising to consciousness, would it feel like its will had been subordinated to some other free will? And so there's a little bit more to be said there, and yet that's where this discussion comes from. And I think it does have to be an ongoing discussion in utopian literature. So wherever I go next in my work, I still think that question will pursue me, as it does anybody who tries to say we could make a decent civilization. Because there is a good argument to be made that there's a Götterdämmerung emotion in us that is strangely delinked from material wants fulfilled. Yes?
What's your daily routine like?
My daily routine as a writer is now pretty set, and I'm very happy with it, which I hadn't been for many years. And this is what happened. I did two things that I think make the difference. I only write my novels outdoors now. So I'm about 100 miles inland from here. It's like the back end of a Mediterranean climate. And, it's hot and dry in the summers. It's cold and damp in the winters. But it's never very cold, and it is awfully hot. It turns out that it's a lot easier to work out there in the cold, which I bundle up, and than it is to work in the hot, at which point I have to put a fan on myself and an ice pack around my back of my neck. But writing outdoors has turned my writing life from something that was making me crazy, because I'm getting antsier as I get older, and I didn't want to sit on my butt in a chair in front of a laptop as much as I had to, since it's a time-intensive job. So moving it outdoors, I have this little meadow adventure every day in my front courtyard. If it rains, I put a tarp overhead. The rain falls around me in like bead curtains, and I'm still working away on my laptop. And I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing I've ever done, even though I'm working. So I've gone crazy, and I work outdoors. And the other thing is, I'm now working every day. When I work on a novel, when I started it all, hopefully it's sort of like a school teacher, start in November, finish in June, work every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, which sounds onerous until you actually get into the rhythm of it, and then it becomes a big helper. You get 5/7 more days of work per week, but also you stay in the flow of it, and you never have to make any choices as to whether I'm working or not, because I'm working. Yeah, I wake up in the morning, I think, what am I going to do today? Well, I'm going to work at some point. And I set up streaks. I have Cal Ripken days, I call them, where I work for like 15 minutes, but I still work that day. To keep the streak alive kind of thing. But these things have made my work life into a pleasure like it used to be when I was younger and starting. And I like the act of writing. I just don't like sitting on my butt in a chair all day. So this is my solution, and it's been, knock on wood, I think this is wood. Hope it goes on for quite some time, because it's good right now.
You have 5 minutes, maybe one more question?
Sure. Yeah.
So now Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 now. It looks like now. I mean, the novel feels like it's been written for now. Although when he wrote it back then, he was probably thinking of, I don't know, near future or just his imagination. I was thinking about your work, and which of them do you think, as or will read still well in the future?
Well, the question's about Fahrenheit 451 and about science fiction that reads accurately, 30 to 50 years later. And first I want to say Fahrenheit 451 is great on that level because it's not really about the burning of the books. It's about the guy inside his TV room, which is like one of these things I've actually seen at Google, where there are TVs on all four sides. It's interactive. It's high fidelity. You talk to your interlocutor who's on the TV show. And so it was Bradbury's novel about TV. And in 1951, or whenever he wrote it, he could see TV doing what it's done. And that was a tremendous bit of science fiction prediction, one of the best we've ever had. And it's ironic, because we think of Bradbury as somewhat of opposed to modernity or wanting to hold on to the human element. And you think of him as being a fantasy writer. Whatever you think about Bradbury, when you reread that book, you'll see that he really caught what TV is going to do. Now, I'm not sure I've done anything that amazing, to tell you the truth. I wrote The Gold Coast in 1986, and now Southern California looks exactly like the Gold Coast. But that was no hard call to make. Path dependency meant that Southern California was doomed to become what it is, and that was clear back in the 80s, no problem. It was probably clear back even in the 60s. So who knows what will happen? I mean, I'm always voting, I'm hoping in my heart that we'll find that Mars is dead as a doornail so that we can actually go to Mars and terraform it without feeling like we're killing off the local bugs underneath. So if we find life on Mars, then the Mars trilogy becomes a fantasy novel or an alternative history novel. And I prefer science fiction to fantasy, so I kind of hope that we get to go to Mars. But that's way off. So I guess that's the point that I'm stuck in. Yeah. So I want to thank you all. It's been fun, and thanks to the Googlers around the world. And Kat, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.